Okay, good morning and welcome to December's meeting of the City Council SCAP Ad Hoc Committee. I'm Brad Eggleston, Palo Alto's Director of Public Works. And just to touch on our usual housekeeping items, we are recording this meeting and will be posted to the city's website. We'll send out a link following the meeting, and we're also streaming the meeting live on YouTube. And then you can ask questions or make comments in the Zoom Q&A function. We'll try to answer those, but even if we're unable to answer a question during the meeting, we'll keep track of them and find a way to answer them later. Next slide, please. This is just illustrating the location of that Q&A function that I referenced. Next slide. This is the agenda for today's meeting. And we'll have a quick review of the November ad hoc meeting that mainly covered electric vehicles and EV charging. Then we'll have a presentation covering the greenhouse gas impacts of transportation with a focus on mobility and land use. And we'll follow that by time for discussion and public comments. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Sustainability Manager, Christine Luong.
Thanks, Brad. Just a quick recap. Our November SCAP ad hoc meeting focused on transportation, in particular electric vehicles and EV chargers. We got a lot of questions from the community focused on various themes around whether or not the city can influence commuter and visitor vehicular travel, whether or not the pandemic factors into our SCAP targets. And we also got a lot of comments focused on implementing EV-capable parking spaces, using gas-powered gardening equipment, and using the REACH code to expand charging infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sylvia Starlack from the Office of Transportation.
Thanks, Christine. I'm Sylvia Starlack, the city's transportation planning manager. I'm going to start today's mobility and land use topic with an overview of our 80 by 30 goal. The Sustainability and Climate Action Plan seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The council has adopted an aggressive 80 by 30 goal, which means that by 2030, the city is targeting reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% compared to 1990 levels. Greenhouse gas emissions are emitted via driving, and transportation is Palo Alto's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. See the big red section of the circle on this slide. This graphic from the SCAP emissions inventory shows that 60.8% of our city's total emissions are from on-road transportation. This presentation will go over some of the main ways Palo Alto can reduce emissions in the transportation sector via transportation and land use choices that reduce vehicle miles of travel, or VMT. I'll be using the term VMT throughout the presentation because gas-powered cars pollute when they operate. More vehicle miles traveled in town means more greenhouse gases emitted. Last month, during the electric vehicle presentation, Hiromi Kelty from Utilities showed this slide and talked about reducing transportation emissions from three scenarios: reducing VMT, electrifying vehicle travel, and improving the efficiency of internal combustion engines. Hiromi's presentation centered on scenario 2, the blue box, electrifying VMT by converting to electric cars and trucks. Scenario 3, the yellow box, improving miles per gallon, is not something the city can control from a regulatory standpoint. However, investing in a smart interconnected signal system that smooths out traffic and reduces idling by gas-powered cars is something the city does now and will continue to do. For this presentation, I will focus on scenario 1, the green box, reducing VMT by reducing travel demand via the city's land use choices and support of other modes of travel. The rough breakdown of our road transportation emissions is that 1/3 of the emissions come from residents, 1/3 from commuters, and 1/3 from visitors. Visitors are defined as non-residents and non-commuters. Delivery vehicles are also included in this group. There are three main ways to reduce VMT in the transportation sector. First, we can improve land use so that all kinds of trips are shorter. Ways to do this include siting housing closer to jobs and making sure that people can walk or bike to most of the things they need. Second, we can make active transportation, that is walking, biking, and transit, more convenient, safer, and easier to use. Third, we can encourage the use of active transportation via education, encouragement, employee programs, and pricing. Hiromi also shared this image last month as well. I'm sharing it here to remind us of the scale of the reductions that Council has asked us to accomplish. The solid columns reflect current VMT by residents, commuters, and visitors. The striped columns represent our emissions targets. Reaching this goal will require a rethinking of our travel choices, judicious investments into our transportation system, and thoughtful policies that support population growth such that future residents, commuters, and visitors drive less. As Hiromi said last month, the city would need a 44% electric vehicle ownership rate in Palo Alto to attain 80 by 30. In addition, commuters and visitors would need to be at 35% ownership of EVs by this date. The state's goal is only 16% EV ownership by 2030. So all cities will need to find other ways to reduce transportation greenhouse gas emissions independent of EV conversion because of the time it will take for our vehicle fleet, that is the vehicles on the road, to turn over to electric motors. According to the California Pollution Control Officers Association, a suburban city like Palo Alto cannot achieve more than 12 to 15% VMT reductions due to our current low density land use pattern. And indeed, the SCAP impact analysis showed our proposed strategies across all sectors can get us to 71% greenhouse gas reduction citywide by 2030. That's 9% short of our 80 by 30 goal. Our SCAP consultant, AECOM, recommended changing land use as one strategy to help bridge this 9% gap. We're lucky to have Assistant Planning Director Rachel Tanner here to talk about land use. Next.
Thank you, Sylvia. Good morning, council members. Good to be with you all today. Just want to share a few slides about land use, and then Ms. Starlock will pick up on more transportation items. So just kind of a broad stroke that I think helps to frame the conversation when it comes to land use is that when we have land uses, different services, housing, retail, other destinations that folks want to travel to, those are really what we're talking about, determining how people get to where they want to go or where they're trying to get to, and then of course how they're going to get there. And so VMT is going to increase when land uses that folks want to travel to are located further apart from each other or further apart from common destinations. So if your work is far away from your home, that might determine how you have to get there. You may not be able to walk or bike. You may use a mode of travel that's more appropriate for a longer haul trip. And so if we can put destinations closer together, we can help to make sure that folks can run all their errands at the same time, for example, or walk or bike to more destinations within easy walking, biking distance of their home, or even of the place that they work. And so one of the things we talk about in city planning is that a really good transportation policy is actually good land use policy because they're so interconnected. So in the short term, land use is fixed, homes, offices, workplaces, retail locations. Those are all pretty big projects that take a lot of years of planning and big investments to come to fruition. And once they're there, they can be there for a long time. Think of historic homes that have been there for 100 years. And so they can be pretty fixed and pretty long-term decisions. But over time, as part of our SCAP work, if council were to approve land use policies and programs related to SCAP or to our housing element, we could begin to have even a more walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly form that allows residents to rely less on their personal automobiles. And so if we can have land use rules that are altered to facilitate changes in the market that the market wants to support, then new development patterns can emerge. One of the concepts that a lot of cities have been using, and it's featured here on this slide, is the 15-minute city. So you can see that graphic that's there on the right. It is a really clever little clock. And so you can see the person's home is in the center, and within 15 minutes, which is that upper quadrant of the clock, they can get to what I think is supposed to be either workplace or school. They can get to some kind of big institution. They can get to school. They can get to a park. They can get to a grocery store. So they can meet some of their daily needs within 15 minutes of walking, biking, or transit from their home. And you can see some other things may not be located within 15 minutes. A hospital, for example, is a facility that has a very, very large service area. It's unlikely that everybody's going to be within 15 minutes of walking or biking from a hospital, and that's okay. And that concept kind of makes room for the fact that everything may not be within 15 minutes of your home. But if the things you go to very frequently can be within a 15-minute walk or bike, then that can help to reduce the VMT. And I will say there are debates. Some cities are 15-minute cities, some are 20-minute cities. They're different minute increments, but the general idea is how can you co-locate things or have your land use pattern support, again, short bike, walk, and transit trips to very, very common and frequent destinations. Next slide. And so one of the main transportation questions to answer in our climate response is around land use. So we're asking ourselves, how do we want to grow? What can we do to reduce GHG emissions through our land use choices to accommodate future growth in Palo Alto? So some of the state and regional responses to the climate crisis are to reduce VMT by locating housing closer to jobs. So we know Palo Alto is an employment center. We've got a lot of folks commuting in. I know some of this has changed during the pandemic, but we do expect that not only has traffic picked back up quite a bit, but once more major employers do return to their office, even if it is in a hybrid work environment, that we will have more commuters who will be, once again, coming to the city of Palo Alto. And so because of the jobs housing imbalance that we have, adding housing is one of our key ways to reduce VMT and reduce the number of commuters in Palo Alto. I know it's something that the council has also spoken to several times and many times to support having more housing and favoring those land use developments. So if we can provide higher density housing along high frequency transit corridors, like near our train stations, near some of our more frequent bus lines, that can help new residents more easily access transportation and perhaps live without using a car as much. And they may use transportation, but they also may be at those locations in a good walking or biking distance from different destinations that they'll want to get to. And there's some recent changes in CEQA at the state level that are, again, trying to favor placing housing near those transit stations. So you can think about SB 10, which allowed certain upzoning, but it was near transit. It wasn't just anywhere in a town. And so connecting our land use and transportation policies, we can see that happening at the state level as well. One of the things that we can think about are half-mile kind of radii around our transit center, around different transit stations, and around different transportation networks. And this is something that the Housing Element Working Group has been working on and thinking about, and the ad hoc as well. And so we'll see that coming forward as the housing element finishes up. And that's definitely an opportunity to really think about the next 8 years of land use and how that can connect with our transportation network. Next slide. So this is a slide that puts a little bit of an example on how much the transportation options that a resident would have can vary based on their location. And so this is a Valley Transportation Authority tool. It maps how far you can go in 15-minute increments from any location by walking and by taking transit only. So this is not including biking. So each color on the map represents an area traversed within a 15-minute block of time. And so on the left, you can see a fictitious person, transit rider Jane. She's in Midtown in Palo Alto, and there's one infrequent bus line there. So in 60 minutes, she can kind of basically mostly get to El Camino and just pass our northern border and southern borders of our city. So you can see the dark blue is that first 15 increment, then the middle blue is the next 15-minute, then the lightest blue is the third 15-minute, and then the red is kind of after an hour. So when you go out all those increments, you've gone out an hour by transit or by walking from her starting point. But when you look at the right, what you see is her starting her trip in Caltrain station, and the range she can travel without a car is much larger there. She can get to Redwood City, to Sunnyvale, and during peak commute times, this range is competitive with the driving times. And so it becomes an easier choice for someone to say, you know what, I'll take Caltrain instead of driving to my destination. And so I think it's important to remember. I know one thing that's been challenging, like many things during the pandemic, is our transit use, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to our transit agencies, and also just how much will folks' appetite for transit return. And just want to remind that even in March 2021, so this year, approximately 7,600 people boarded a VTA vehicle in Palo Alto. Route 22 is the most popular here in Palo Alto, and the transit center is one of the most popular destinations. Likely because from there you can connect to lots of different modes of transit and different buses and trains that are going different directions. So 2% of 522 riders are traveling within Palo Alto, and 28% are traveling to and from Palo Alto. So those are people who might be supporting the economy of Palo Alto, even though they don't live here. So even though we're in the pandemic still, people are still using transit as an option to get around. And we do hope that they will return to using transit as the pandemic hopefully continues to wane and we can continue to move forward. If we can go to the next slide. So just a few more options that could reduce VMT. One is managing how much parking is provided in new developments and whether it's priced separately or if it's included with the housing that's built. So those are ways that we can reduce VMT and improve housing affordability. One of the things we might be wondering about priced separately, one strategy is called unbundling, where you might have let's say you have a condo that you bought, or it's an apartment that you're renting, but if you want to purchase a parking space or rent a parking space, it's an additional cost that's not included in your rent or your mortgage. And so you have to decide, do I really value that parking space that much to go ahead and make that purchase? And so it helps to kind of use kind of market principles to help folks make a decision about where they want to invest their money. As noted earlier, siting housing near transit is key, and siting it near pedestrian and bicycle facilities, allowing future residents to have options to driving to all options that are alternatives to driving. So good design can also be part of that. And I think we have a strong history of very good urban design here in Palo Alto that we want to continue to promote high quality pedestrian environments that make people enjoy walking, and making sure that longer distance walks are pleasant and feel safe and feel comfortable, as well as biking facilities that help people feel safe and comfortable. Adding mixed income housing is important because it allows people with different incomes to live in Palo Alto, which again can help reduce the number of long haul commuters driving into the Bay Area. One of the things we've seen all across the Bay Area in the last decade really is how much folks who don't have as much money have been pushed to the periphery of the Bay Area. And I feel like the definition and boundaries of the Bay Area keep expanding, in part because the workforce that work in the Bay Area has continued to get pushed further and further out, with some folks having 2 and 3 hour one-way drive time commutes because that's where they can afford to live. So having a mix of incomes in the city is really, really important, and really throughout the entire Bay Area. And so if we can also locate housing next to employment centers, that can also make sure folks could walk or bike to their jobs and their places of employment. So this is in line with our housing element priorities, and something that I think we'll continue to see be priorities that are incorporated into the housing element to really be smart about how we are thinking about the future of where different land uses are placed. Next slide. And I believe Ms. Starlack will take over from here.
Yes, thanks, Rachel. Now that we understand that land use sets the limit for our VMT reductions, I'm going to move off of land use and come back to transportation. I'd like to talk about expanding travel options. So you may remember that this is the second main work area in which we could reduce VMT. In particular, how can we reduce VMT and preserve mobility while adding residents? It turns out that our roads currently are not very efficient. This slide shows how the same number of people fit onto the road when in a bus, on bikes, or in cars. You can see that for the same number of people, the cars take up the most space. A road that only has cars on it carries fewer people than one that includes a mix of other modes of travel. The relative inefficiency of car driving has congestion and mobility implications we all experience when traveling during rush hours. Rather than think about the number of cars a road carries, a sustainable approach examines how many people a road carries. Recent research shows that roughly half of all car trips in US cities are under 3 miles, and they could be replaced with zero emissions micromobility options such as scooters and bikes. To accommodate future growth and preserve mobility at the same time, the city will need to work to diversify the travel options available in town, build or adjust infrastructure to improve the capacity of active transportation modes, and improve transit and traffic flow. I think of this work as building and optimizing the infrastructure needed to expand walking, biking, micromobility, and transit, all four of which are the elements of active transportation. Ultimately, our travel modes need to work together, allowing easy transfers between them. The efforts of the Seamless Bay Area Initiative are a good start to knitting the system together for improved ease of use. And to illustrate the seamless travel concept, here are two examples. One Office of Transportation staffer who resides in the East Bay walks to BART to reach San Francisco and then bikes to Caltrain to reach Palo Alto. This person uses 4 modes of travel to get to work. Another staffer learned to bike in his 20s and now bikes from his San Francisco home to Caltrain. From an SCAP cost benefit perspective, initiatives that help people use active transportation are the most impactful and cheapest transportation programs for the city to fund. The next 2 slides list some projects the city is currently pursuing or could pursue to support active transportation in the next few years. We hope to construct the South Palo Alto Bikeways project in 2023 and are currently working to secure the project's design consultant. Once we refill our senior transportation planner position, we'll begin our update of the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan, and we'll schedule the launch of our micromobility pilot to add bike share and e-scooters to our transportation mix. An assessment of where to plan for protected bicycle facilities, such as protected bike lanes or protected intersections, is expected as part of the bike plan update. On-demand transit. The on-demand transit pilot that will launch next year is a 2-year trial of an Uber pool type of transit, though we will require the vendor to provide an alternative to mobile apps to book a ride for those who don't use mobile devices. After 2 years, the city will need to decide if funding can be found to support continuing the program or if reconstituting the free shuttle would be a better investment. Staff has already started working on the designation of vehicle-free streets, and there's an upcoming item at council to discuss this in the new year. A proposed pilot project is to site mobility hubs in neighborhoods where bike share, e-scooters, and shared cars are centrally located. This strategy supports living locally, active transportation, and low vehicle ownership, reducing VMT pollution and congestion. Mobility as a service takes the seamless transportation idea I spoke about earlier and integrates payment and other systems into a digital platform. A mobility as a service pilot could see residents booking and paying for their scooter ride from Mitchell Park to the CalAV Caltrain station, and then accessing their employer-provided Caltrain pass all in one app. The third area of work to reduce VMT is to promote a right tool for the job approach to transportation. How we price parking, transit, and micromobility will help create an environment where active transport modes are the rational choice for shorter trips. Managing our parking supply so that those who need to drive can find parking efficiently is also important. Education and encouragement programs could support choosing to walk or bike for trips of 2 miles or less, taking an e-bike, bus, or shuttle for trips 2 to 5 miles in length, and using Caltrain BART, other long-haul transit, and electric cars for longer trips. This kind of approach will help reduce both emissions and congestion. Finally, ensuring that employer commute programs are comprehensive and enforced will help commuters access active modes. The next 2 slides will cover the projects and programs in these areas that we're working on now and those that we could start in the next few years if approved and funded by council. Let's start with parking policy and management. We've already started installing smart parking infrastructure in public garages to cut down on the VMT expended and pollution emitted in idling and circling for spots. The next 2 items are parking pricing programs. Pricing is a powerful tool that supports efficient mode choice. Making monthly parking cost the same as a monthly Caltrain pass would put the 2 modes on more equal footing and would likely reduce driving into town. Council has already taken steps to adjust parking prices in this direction, and parking fees could become a way to fund active transportation. Finally, managing the supply of parking. required by new developments can reduce vehicle miles traveled, and many cities are revising their parking minimums in recognition of this dynamic in order to respond to the climate crisis. The programs on this slide work to improve road users' access and use of active transportation. An exciting proposed program for major employers would be a new collaboration between transportation and utility staff to provide a commute program assessment for large utilities clients so that both their transport and building emissions could be assessed via one program. Another area of work is to explore policies supporting employee telecommuting and strengthening and enforcing our employer transportation demand management plans. As a side note, since I know someone will ask, while telecommuting has the potential to reduce VMT, the extent of the reduction is unclear. Research finds that telecommuters may compensate by making other non-work trips of longer distances. Also, telecommuting has impacts to our local economy in that missing commuters cannot support our local businesses. And this is where the addition of housing and a focus on living locally is doubly important to our city's ability to thrive. Third, expansion of the Transportation Management Association to areas beyond downtown and the CalAV business districts would help employees of smaller businesses access transit and active modes. In particular, the TMA's low-income transit subsidies help employees who can't afford local housing and skyrocketing gas prices get here in ways that don't congest our roads. Mobility programs for all abilities refers to expanding our active transportation programs like Safe Routes to School in order to expand mobility for all demographics. This could look like an ambassador program. Residents could mentor and support others in the community around how to use transit or how to bike in town. Our residents who organize Bike Palo Alto, support Bike to Work Day, and are members of bicycle and pedestrian advocacy groups are already in the trenches doing this important work. We should support and institutionalize the efforts of these leaders to normalize for everyone that getting around town without a car is not only feasible, but often faster and more convenient. We do have experience in promoting active transportation through our Safe Routes to School partnership. So we have a foundation of knowledge around what it takes to help people shift modes. Our success in increasing student biking, which is shown here on these slides, is the product of years of collaboration and partnership between parents, schools, and the city to develop supportive programs, policies, and infrastructure. The city will need to enact the policy changes, infrastructure projects, and programs like this one to encourage residents, visitors, and commuters to rethink how they travel to and within Palo Alto. The key is to create a transportation environment where the rational choice is to use the greenest travel mode for each trip. We're already in a good place to start this work. Ask most high school students in town, and they will say that biking is the fastest way to get to school. Finally, a greener and more integrated transportation future will require lots of planning and studies. Beyond the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan update that I mentioned earlier, the city could conduct a land use and transportation study to evaluate scenarios with lower VMT outcomes than our current environment. Additionally, a mobility equity needs assessment could be conducted to ensure that special populations like the frail elderly, youth, and those with mobility challenges are able to access the mobility options they need. Another key move is to enact Vision Zero policies and programs to provide a level of safety that users can count on across all modes needed to get here. Vision Zero and a safe systems approach work to eliminate fatalities and severe injuries on our roads and require systemic data analysis across all modes to support strategic infrastructure investments. This approach would also make the transportation system more robust and equitable for all road users. To close my part of the presentation today, I'd like to say that the climate crisis marks an opportunity for us to do challenging and innovative work that will help us achieve other longstanding goals or co-benefits beyond greenhouse gas reduction. I'm encouraged that we are starting this work at a good place and that with our collective efforts and imagination, we can make significant progress to help Palo Alto thrive and maintain its high quality of life. Thanks for your attention. Back to you, Christine.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia and Rachel. We'd like to take a minute now that you finished your presentation to get some feedback from the SCAP Ad Hoc Committee, Vice Mayor Burt and Councilmember Cormack.
Should I stop sharing?
Oh, I can hear. I didn't know if Allison wanted to go first, but so a couple of things. Thank you very much. That's the framework for where we need to head on this. I want to dive in a little bit more on what we have in terms of quantitative assumptions and projections that we can make. So one is on the impact of telecommuting. I saw just this week that the Bay Area Council came out with their deepest report so far on what they anticipate will be the long-term impacts of the shift to telecommuting that were spurred by the pandemic, but to a good extent, they expect to stick. And they projected, I think, an average of a 3-day work week for all those who are able to work remotely, which in the tech community is the overwhelming proportion of the workers. And at the same time, they were more guarded on the impact of that on regional congestion. And it's not quite clear to me why that latter assumption follows, but nevertheless, that's what I saw so far in the report. But I do think that telecommuting is here to stay. We don't know with any precision what amount there will be, but we do have some bands there. But the lack of certainty is the case on all of our assumptions in the plan. And so the fact that we have unknowns on that, I don't think is a basis to exclude it from our projections. Everything we're doing here is based upon different assumptions, projections, and I really think what we need to do is establish kind of bandwidths on conservative and more optimistic projections, and as we over time get better information and data, we refine that. And then I did want to dive in on the land use as well, because that was a really good report on kind of all the guiding principles, but I couldn't see anything in terms of what assumptions we're making will be the greenhouse gas reductions resulting from these changes in land use that we're planning to do. I see very strong social and congestion and parking impacts. But if we take that, if you go back to the slide that had the breakdown within the transportation sources of local residents, commuters, and visitors, what we're talking about is on commuters, if we add 6,000 housing units in the next 8 years, which would be almost 25% increase in our housing units in our community. So that'd be a radical transformation. We've got about a third of our transportation greenhouse gases that are related to commuting, or about 20% of our total greenhouse gases. And if we round up and say it's an increase of housing units by 25%, we have 20% of our GHGs from commuting, and we get a 25% roughly reduction in the commuters, but we currently have about 70% of residents who work outside of Palo Alto. Arguably, their commute distance to their future jobs would likely be less if we have them essentially work or live and work on the peninsula or in the valley rather than from greater distances. So that would need to be factored in. But if you have, say, just a 50% net impact of those new residents having a reduction in commute vehicle miles traveled, that takes that 5% impact down to 2.5%. And then if we then calculate the kind of the organic reductions that we're expecting, either organic or driven, that from EV adoption, if they're already going to convert to EVs, then we don't get that greenhouse gas reduction to count it twice. Once from reducing the commute and the second time from them switching to a non-emission vehicle. So I ballpark that as taking it down to half of that 2.5%. So that's about 1.25%. And then on top of that, we've got even more commute reduction that's coming organically from the work from home or the telecommuting to whatever degree that's there. But that takes it, even without the telecommuting, it looks like it may take the impact on greenhouse gas reductions based on my back of the napkin, perhaps below 2% reduction. And I don't know whether those assumptions are correct, but I think it's very important that we look objectively at the data and as opposed to just saying, gee, conceptually, this is going to have this enormous impact. I think it's important to do from a social standpoint, from parking impacts, from congestion, and other reasons, in addition to greenhouse gases, but it doesn't appear to be an overwhelming impact on greenhouse gas reductions. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'm not seeing any of the calculations there put up in a transparent way. Conversely, we had last month a discussion around two-stroke engines in landscaping, leaf blowers and others. And if I can, staff clarify for me, we had a 4% figure, and I'm trying to remember whether that was 4% of all GHG emissions or 4% of mobile GHG emissions. Does anybody recall?
I think, Christine, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. For the gas-powered gardening equipment, so in Palo Alto, gas-powered two-stroke leaf blowers are included in what we call the portable equipment sector, and that counts for about 3,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, or about 0.6% of our overall greenhouse gas.
Oh, okay, even far less. So I had a wrong figure there. Okay, very good then. So those were areas that I'd really like to see us to model and have actual data and make our decisions based upon kind of transparent calculations of cost benefits for different initiatives. I think that the new housing, and in particular, the location and services that are provided on that are extremely important for a whole range of reasons, but it doesn't appear to be an extremely significant proportion of our greenhouse gas reductions. And if that's not correct, I'm really open-minded to what is the correct analysis, because mine's the back of the napkin, but I'm not seeing anything other than mine put on the table. So I look forward to that going forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. As I noted in the presentation, that kind of analysis we were not able to do, and that is why we need to do some scenario testing with the land use and transportation model in order to get exactly an understanding of the dynamics that you're talking about.
Great, thanks. Oh, and I should mention that Deborah Goldine sent an email to our committee and had an interesting idea. You know, we have, really anecdotally, we hear so much of when people move to electric bikes or electric cargo bikes, they just end up falling in love with them. But the challenge is getting to people to experience that. And I know Justine Bird has done a lot of evaluation of this, but the suggestion was that we have loaner programs to introduce people to the advantages of, say, an electric cargo bike, and maybe the most cost-effective way to do that would be through our bike shops, whether we give kind of some financial support to that on a limited basis. I suspect it wouldn't take a lot to be able to help subsidize a 1 week loaner program for cargo bikes so that people can really experience them. That might be easier than us doing it through staff, but I don't know what's the best way, but I just wanted to get that out on the table. I thought it was a valuable idea. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, sorry.
No, I agree. That's a good strategy. Many communities are starting to do things like that. They're using their libraries to do loaner programs, bike shops. I think Oakland's doing a similar thing. So yeah, thank you.
Love the idea of using the libraries, of course. Yeah, because a lot of people won't necessarily go to a bike shop, but libraries are spread throughout our community. Okay, well, good morning all. I know that Mr. Eggleston is going to welcome our working group members at the conclusion of my remarks. So hello to all of you. And thanks to staff for the cooperative presentation here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to think more cohesively and broadly about the future. This is less about, I think, the numbers today and more about where do we want to go and how are we going to get there? Sorry for the bad transportation pun. I'm struck as always by the yellow parts on the map that Ms. Starlack showed. And if I connect that to the 15-minute city slide that Ms. Tanner showed, sometimes I wonder if we're doing this the wrong way, trying to shove people, that's a bad phrase, trying to concentrate people where there is already transportation and services. And I wonder, as I always do, if we should be moving more of the services into the neighborhoods, because that generates, so much VMT for the people who live in places like Jane in Midtown. It does take a long time to get places. And so that's the thought that I have looking at the map and thinking about the 15-minute city, in addition to perhaps building more housing near Caltrain or El Camino, what have you. Should we be thinking from a land use perspective about allowing more activities in the neighborhoods that makes it easier for people, just on their daily walk or whatever, to get a few more of those needs, a few more ticks around there. So I was struck by the mobility hubs concept, because wouldn't that be interesting? If you think about some of the underused spaces during the days, whether it's parking lots at churches, I'm thinking about the Y in my neighborhood, right now, in terms of that, whether it's the electric bike or the EV car share, wouldn't that be an interesting way? I think the other thing is, people need to see these things, right? And if you see a funky looking bike, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute, because there's like so many different kinds now, I'm like, wow. Then that sparks an interest, and that person is someone you could stop as you're walking on the street and say, hey, what is that? How does that work? So that's what I'm thinking about, less about how do we move people to where the services are, and more about the reality that I think Jonathan Late usually says, and Ms. Tanner can correct me if I'm wrong, 70% of our community is single family residential land. Good, you're nodding, I'm in the right area. So I think we have to do both of those things. So very interested in the mobility hubs. And the reason building more housing won't necessarily reduce all of this VMT is the point that my colleague made, that about 2/3 of the people who live here don't work here. And the largest employers on the peninsula aren't actually near Caltrain. So God bless the person who's willing to use 4 different modes of transportation, but that takes a while, and that takes time. So I'm not ready to make any decisions, but the idea that housing here reserved for people who live here, who work here, or having employers who are here, there's something to be done there that is more thoughtful, I think, than the way that we've approached it so far. I was interested to think about, like, what does living locally mean? And I think that's actually one of the lessons from the pandemic. People are living hyper locally, right? We did for a while. and more interested in things. And that means we need to bring more things to them, spread it out a bit. I'll just keep going through all of this, but staff should feel, yeah, Brad, did you want to interrupt me for a minute? No, okay, all right. So I really appreciate Ms. Starlack, the idea that we should shift from cars per road to people per road. That's an interesting metric, right? Could talk about throughput, right? It's a shift for people. So I appreciate that way of thinking about it. Now, okay, many trips under 3 miles, and people should quote, be using bikes or scooters or what have you. For me, I want to talk, actually, let me just shift to parking for a minute, because there are 2 things on parking I wanted to mention. I do support unbundled parking. I don't understand why we've been so reluctant to do it in this community. People do it, and doing it in San Francisco for decades, right? Yeah, if you want to have a car and you want to have a car space, it's going to cost you more to stay in your apartment or condo or whatever. So I remain supportive of that for a variety of reasons. But now let's talk about parking for bikes. And those wonderful adult tricycles, totally want to talk about those. Thanks for 2 photos of that, because boy, doesn't that make a difference. That totally expands the number of people who might be able to use this as a way to get to where they need to go. And then the cargo bikes are getting crazy. The other day at Mitchell Park, like this one family, it was as long as the car. It had stuff on the front and stuff on the back. And I was like, goodness me. So when I finish my long monologue, I'd love to understand what we should be doing about parking for these types of, I guess they're frankly of vehicles. It may be powered by feet, but it was, and it blocked everything. And, God bless the mom who was maneuvering it. But I don't think our system is not set up to accommodate the wide variety of innovation we have in these. I don't even want to call them bicycles. We have to call them something else. So definitely interested in that. That brings me to the mobility equity. I've been making this point for years, right? It's part of why I think having a shuttle system is so important. Because, even despite, an adult tricycle, somebody who's on crutches or using a walker, that's not going to work for them. So expanding our concept from everyone should ride a bike with 2 wheels, which is, kind of what it's felt like for a while, to what are ways that we can make it easier for everyone to not use a car. That's a big shift. That's a really big shift. I'm so happy to hear it being described that way. And I think it's going to make it an easier choice for more people. I heard Ms. Starlack say the rational choice a couple of times, but we know that most people aren't actually rational. We don't make rational decisions. We make decisions based on emotion and convenience. So maybe we need to make it the easiest choice, something like that. I appreciate that it might be a rational choice. And then I guess the other thing that I reflected on, sort of looking at the maps and thinking about the kinds of method, what people want to do, where they live, and how they might get places is, and I'm not saying we should do an analysis or a study, but for me, thinking about sort of the demographic segments of who lives where they go to do what, right? We make a lot of assumptions about people who are working in tech, right? They work here and they're going to get on the train and go to work. But what about our community which is aging, and where they live, and what is it that they want to do during the day, and where do they want to go? And of course, then we'd have a student segment, that kind of thing, because one of the things we haven't talked about very much today is people don't just go one place, right? They aren't just going to work or school. After school, kids need to go to their practice, and it may not be in this community, right? Or they want to go to the skate park and we don't have one, so they have to get in a car to go skate in Sunnyvale. So that was a long monologue, but those are the things I'm thinking about, and it really, for me, goes beyond reducing greenhouse gases. It really goes to how we create a better community. And I think anytime that people are not in their cars, they're more likely to talk with others and interact. And I think that will make it stronger. And I think to the extent we can reduce how far people have to go for their daily needs, that will make a difference. So that's the end of my long monologue. And Ms. Tanner and Ms. Starlack, if you have any thoughts or follow-ups, I'd appreciate hearing them.
Sure, I have a couple things. I agree with you. I think, again, this land use transportation study that I'm suggesting we conduct could answer the first item that you brought up, which is, what services need to be placed in the neighborhoods in order to reduce VMT so that we're doing more of that internal trip making. So I think that's one piece. I think adding affordable housing here was, I think, part of the answer where you're saying something's kind of missing here. I think that you were right. A lot of residents work out of town, but if we're going to add people here, when we add affordable housing to town, then the people who work here who can't right now afford to live here could live here, and then they would have shorter trips, right, to work. Yeah. So that's why the adding of affordable housing to Palo Alto is particularly helpful in terms of VMT and greenhouse gas reduction.
Can I just follow up on that for a minute?
Sure.
Because I actually really appreciated the comment about mixed income housing. Yeah. Because I want to talk about, whether it's a dental hygienist or a physical therapist or a pharmacist, they may not qualify for affordable housing.
Right.
So we are still not creating the complete community we need. And we are still, requiring people to commute here for things that we need and live elsewhere. So I neglected to say that earlier, that I think in order to have a complete community, affordable housing is subsidized housing. And there's a whole segment of this community that we need. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I was using the shorthand, but
no, I know. I think it's an important part of the communication for everyone to understand the differences. So sorry, go ahead.
And I am also excited by all the different kinds of bikes that are showing up on our streets. It's really wonderful. Next time when you see that, Mom, please take a picture and send it to me.
Okay. I'll ask permission first. But
yes, of course. We have started, we just recently, I think at the Stanford Shopping Center, installed cargo bike parking. So so I am trying to work to broaden our bike parking standards. So that'll be something that we're going to have to do. So you can find those, I think, on the somewhere on the El Camino frontage, right when you walk into the mall, right there.
Yeah. Well, let's have them at the grocery stores, which would be the first place, right, that people would need to go and have, more space to transport stuff.
Right. And I am eternally grateful to whoever it was who put the bike racks at this Safeway Midtown, because I use those all the time. I don't know if Rachel has anything else to say about the land use things that you bought.
Comment on the idea of kind of, distributing destinations into the neighborhoods, as well as, I think it's like many big problems like climate change, it's usually a both and especially long-term challenges like land use changes. I think it's a both and so, everything old is new again. And so, we went through a period of city planning where the idea was to separate land uses. And that creates, a lot of that was driven by some of our development patterns in the post-war United States and separating things. And now we kind of say, well, wouldn't it be nicer if things were closer together, more akin to some development patterns that, predated that? And so that would be like your neighborhood corner store, or having smaller scale amenities that are more distributed. And like, similar to the hospital, there are some uses that are going to be aggregate and not going to have that many of them in a community. Maybe the YMCA is an example. There's only going to be a certain number that can be supported by the population. And so folks may have to go a little further to get to some things like that. But smaller scale things, can they be distributed? Can our land uses allow it? And then a question that I don't really know the answer to, but I know, if we pursued it as a city, we could get answers, is there are sometimes scales of kind of saying, well, if you have this much retail, let's say it's a corner store, where you can get some food and just different little items that you might need. How many people need to live within what radius of that store for that store to be supported? And so kind of thinking about the interplay between how many people can get to that place and might get to that place and how much square footage they could support and what kind of uses could be supported. So it's certainly something we can look further into. And especially as we were thinking about the housing element, that can also be an opportunity to think not just about housing, but some of the services that go along with those potentially residents that we're planning for.
Yeah, and I would just add to that list, there's a difference between a hospital and, a dentist, for example, right? We already allow medical offices more distributed, but maybe even more distributed along with, whatever. And the corner store is such an interesting concept. I mean, when I was growing up on the East Coast, I remember as a kid being able to walk to the corner store and, buy stuff. Now, obviously, with people getting more things online, but maybe it's not a store, maybe it's a hub, right? Where different things are provided different parts of the day. Maybe it's an Amazon delivery hub. I think there are ways to think about this that, anyway, it sounds like you guys have heard what I'm saying, but right, we've had such a focus on put people where the things are, and we have such a large part of our community where there are people and nothing else. So I think having a little bit of thought going the other way, and I agree with you all, it's circular and maybe that's one of the things we're going to get out of the pandemic is, a return to what you can do with, what's nearby. Anyway, sorry, I think Ms. Starlack, you might have had a few more things.
Oh, no. I'm good. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but I will stop.
Yeah, no. I think I just want to say I really appreciate the evolution in the discussion from everyone should ride a two-wheeled bike to how are we going to make this work for everyone. So really, really happy to see that. And I think building on the success we have with our students, they're going to be the generation that's most affected by what we do or do not do. And they can help us figure out as long as they carry this forward into their life and help the rest of us make changes. All right, Brad, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, and Sylvia and Rachel. Really good presentation and discussion so far. Before turning to public comments, as Councilmember Cormack mentioned, I do want to acknowledge that since our last ad hoc meeting, we formed what we're calling our SCAP working group. And this is a group of 5 community members who have expertise that can really contribute to our effort here. And they'll be helping staff and the ad hoc with the SCAP update work. So the members are Diane Bailey, who's the Executive Director of Menlo Spark, Lincoln Blevins, the Executive Director of Sustainability and Energy Management from Stanford, Justine Burt, who's a Sustainability Consultant, Debbie Meitels from 350 Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, and Julia Zeitlin from Silicon Valley Sunrise Hub. And I believe Diane, Justine, and Debbie are with us here today. I know Lincoln planned to be here. He may have joined and I might not have seen him. But before we turn to the general public comment period, I'd like to invite any of the working group members who would like to share any comments they may have, or if they'd like to introduce themselves, or both. So if you'd like to, just there's only a few of you, so I think you could just turn your video and mic on and speak.
Well, maybe I'll go first. I'm on the top of my list here, but it doesn't make sense. But I'm Debbie Meitels, and it's always been very important and insightful to listen to the staff presentations on these issues because our staff is doing a great deal of thinking about all the things that need to be done. What I found interesting in today's presentation were the comments about things for which we need more resources and personnel. And I guess at some point, those are, as we're getting down into the more specific details that we need to work on, those are going to be the things we need to think about. How can we manage to do those, and also to prioritize which will be the ones that will be most effective in reducing the GHG emissions. But I think we're really on the right track here, and I really appreciate all the efforts that are being done and the comments that people are making in the questions and the comments as well. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Debbie. I think Diane Bailey has her hand raised.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I appreciate this presentation. I think staff have put in a lot of thoughtful design into the measures that we need to take to reach the 80 by 30 goal. And what I'm seeing between the staff presentation and the comments is sort of a gap between where we know we need to go as a community and some of the community sentiments that are holding us back. So demands for free and plentiful parking, maintaining a tight housing market to keep people's, homeowners, the value of their homes up. And how do we overcome that gap with, improving public awareness and education? I saw a really great comment from Jane Roston about availability of coaching for people to help them with mobility choices, but also wondered if that could be extended beyond mobility just to, concierge service to help people kind of sort through the choices that they face. And then coupled with that, kind of improving public awareness about the invisible cost of parking and some of the roadway infrastructure that's provided to drivers that kind of tips the balance in favor of driving versus active transportation. And I think most people are unaware of that. And same goes for the land use choices, that I think a lot of folks are just really unaware of how the land use choices really deeply favor single family homes. So I don't know if there is a budget to improve public outreach, but I think that could really help decision makers implement some of the measures that staff have proposed that might feel politically touchy right now, or face a little bit of opposition from homeowners. Yeah, but thank you for this excellent presentation today, and thanks for having me on this ad hoc committee.
Thanks, Diane. And Justine.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I really appreciate how sophisticated this conversation is. Not why we need to do this, but how do we actually do it? How do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And I want to share 3 quick thoughts based on recent projects I've been working on. One is, as part of the nonprofit Manzanita Works, we received an allocation of 49 Caltrain Go passes to give out to people in our community, and I distributed them looking specifically for people who work and live within half a mile of a Caltrain stop. And so it was really helpful to be able to focus on which niche am I looking for, what kind of person in what kind of situation, because the people who can get to work by taking one main transit pipeline, who live within a mile, half a mile of that pipeline, it's going to be more likely they can take it, as opposed to somebody has to take a bus and then change to another bus and then change to Caltrain, and then they're 2 miles away from work. So that was really successful to connect up low-wage service sector workers in this county and San Mateo County with Caltrain Go passes. And I also did a survey of 50 low-wage service sector workers in Redwood City recently to find out what were the barriers to them biking to work. And half of them didn't have bicycles. Those who did, many didn't have lights, helmets, or locks. And of those 50 people I surveyed, half of them just weren't sure how to safely get to work. And so I think there would be a lot of value in connecting people up with those wonderful bike maps that every city has, in terms of, no, you don't want to take El Camino Real or Middlefield or Embarcadero to work. There are these wonderful bike boulevards, Bryant Street, and roads that go through the neighborhoods to get safely from home to work. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to connect people up with information about what are the better routes to get, the kind of north, south, east, west routes to get through. And the final thought is that in 2017, my family went on a grand tour of Europe, and in Copenhagen and Berlin and Paris and northern Spain and Madrid, we rented bikes for one day, and there's so many protected bike lanes, not green stripes on the road, not white stripes on the road, but physical concrete barriers between distracted drivers in many cases and cyclists. And I think we're not going to get out of the single digits of % of people bicycling until people feel safer on the roads and know that the cars can't possibly hit them. So I do wonder if the city is actively looking at opportunities to create more protected bike lanes so we can get more people bicycling for those 1 mile, 2 mile, up to 5 mile trips if they have an electric bike, and get out of their car. And thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. So I think we're going to turn to our public comment session now. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and we'll call on you.
And well, before we get to that, I just wanted to, if Sylvia, if you can go to the next slide. Just to share that our next SCAP ad hoc meeting will be on January 13th. And we will focus on climate impacts of particularly the health impacts from wildfires, wildfire protection, and sea level rise. And we'll have some speakers from Stanford, as well as the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And this coming Monday, December 13th, we will be presenting an update on our SCAP work to council. So we hope you can join there. And so now, next slide, please. We can open for public comment. And if Sylvia, if you can stop sharing, I will share my screen and then we can switch over. Okay, so first up, first of all, if you have a comment, please raise your hand and we will call on you. And so Karin can take over from here, but the first person will be Arnaut Bolin.
Arnaut, you should be a panelist now, so you can unmute your mic and show your face. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Penny, you'll be next.
Thank you so much. Dear members of the SCAP ad hoc committee, my name is Arnaut Boelens. I am a volunteer for Safe Routes to School and a member of Payback, but this morning I'm speaking as an individual. Walking and bicycling are some of the modes of transportation with the least amount of CO2 emissions. In addition, as shown by the major reduction in traffic congestion at schools due to the Safe Routes to School partnership, offering a viable alternative to driving can convince people to walk and bike instead of drive and reduce traffic congestion. This is one of the clear advantages of promoting walking and bicycling over promoting electric car ownership. However, time and time again, people will tell you they do not feel safe riding their bikes in Palo Alto. While this is anecdotal evidence, studies also consistently find that the lack of perceived and actual comfort and safety is a known major deterrent to cycling. These people actually have a point. Palo Alto does well enough on road safety compared to other communities in the Bay Area, but there's plenty of room for improvement if the city actively pursued its goal of 0 severe injuries and fatalities and actually adhered to its policy of prioritizing road safety over level of service, as is mentioned in the comprehensive plan. Therefore, I would like to urge the city of Palo Alto to adopt a safe system road safety policy. As humans, we are vulnerable to injury and make mistakes. However, no one should die or get severely injured on the road as a consequence of a mistake. By adopting a safe system approach, known safety principles will be applied proactively instead of continuing to wait for tragedy to happen. In addition, every infrastructure and repaving project should include a safety report, explaining why the chosen design is the safest for all road users. And every fatal crash should be investigated by a traffic engineer to establish why things still go wrong and suggest improvements. The Federal Highway Administration recently adopted its own Safe System program, and the recent Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act allocated $5 billion for a Safe Streets for All program. I encourage the city to take advantage of these funds, and I would like to urge the city of Palo Alto to provide a safe transportation network for people of all ages and abilities who walk, bike, ride, transit, and drive. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you, Arnaut. The next speaker is Penny. Penny, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So I really appreciate Arnaut's previous comments, and so I'm not going to repeat any of them, but I want to concur with him. and add that, I heard comments that, as people are aging, that they are going to want to move to other kinds of transportation infrastructure. And in fact, there are great new studies out that make it crystal clear that bicycling is an absolutely great form of exercise for aging people. And now as I'm entering the senior category, I'm finding that it's a form of exercise that actually helps me maintain balance, and it helps me, it's that use it or lose it stuff. So yes, we do eventually get to a state where we may or may not be able to do that kind of activity, but I don't think we should assume that because people are aging that they aren't going to want to be able to choose these active modes of transportation. And I also want to add that e-cars are not really a sustainable form of transportation. They are better than gas-powered cars by a lot, but the manufacturing process of these cars and the infrastructure that supports them, the street systems that are very, very environmentally expensive to maintain, and the parking garages and all the things that have to support those cars, those are very environmentally expensive. So we really do need to work actively and very hard at moving a larger percentage of the population toward modes of transportation that are less intensive than electric cars. And I'm going to finish up there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Penny. Next speaker is Ken Joy.
Ken Joy, I live in the Ventura neighborhood, and this is the first time I've been able to attend one of these SCAP meetings. So I want to thank all the people who've been involved in this effort up to now. In particular, the staff who made an excellent presentation today. I really appreciate the work that went into that and the points that were made. I will say, though, there was one thing on the presentation slides that I didn't see, which I addressed to City Council in July of 2018. And that was the Neighborhood Traffic Safety and Bicycle Boulevard Phase 2. As I said, I live in the Ventura neighborhood. Our home is on Park Boulevard, and I appreciate having that facility. I would like to see it improved. I'd like to see a speed hump in front of my house, as was on the map in the concept plan that City Council approved years ago. Please move forward with that among all the other things that you have addressed today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ken. Our next speaker is David Cole. David, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I would like to support the last three speakers and all their comments, so I won't spend any time on that, and wanted to welcome our new community members to the ad hoc committee. I would like to step back and take a look at the 50,000 foot level of what we're doing here. And it seems that the ad hoc committee is off to the side working on the SCAP. Meanwhile, when they get on the council, they're doing all the daily business of making major decisions. And I haven't been listening to all the council meetings, but we need to have the SCAP brought into every major decision that we make. So when a parking lot comes up, it needs to be, how will this impact the SCAP and our ability to reach our 80 by 30 goal? When closing University Avenue comes up, it should be part of that discussion, a major part of that discussion, because we can't continue to make car driving the norm and the easiest thing, and then expect and have all our policies say the otherwise. We need the actions to match the policies and the directions that we need to go on a daily, or in the council place, a weekly basis, to make sure that we have an integrated approach to this. And the same comments to staff. When you're doing a report, you need to say, this is how it will affect the SCAP, positively or negatively, so that the council has the correct information to make the best choice moving forward. We have an 8 or 10% gap in our SCAP goals based on projections right now. So we need to make that up on a daily basis wherever we can with all our choices, whether it's XCAP, closing Churchill, parking lots, building roads, etc. It needs to be across the board and be in front of the council all the time. Thank you so much for your work.
Great, thank you, David. Our next speaker is Arthur Keller. Arthur Keller, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I would like to talk about how parking unbundling from housing. We have a requirement that BMR housing has a limit to how much you can charge for housing. But if you unbundle parking, parking is not included in the limit. So therefore, we need to figure out how to charge people who live in BMR housing for the parking and the housing if it makes sense that the housing price is lowered, but now the housing price is increased. So with the parking, so we need to figure out how even though there is no rule for now, we need to figure out how to lower the price for housing, because the people who have parking, they should not pay any extra for their parking because of the price limitation. Furthermore, they should not be forced to park in the street. They should not be forced to park elsewhere. They should park on their own parking on their own property. So therefore, they don't have to drive around looking for parking. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Arthur. Our next speaker is Helen Grossman. Can you unmute yourself, Helen?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for the presentation and the time to speak today. I really appreciate the committee and staff's work on behalf of sustainability and climate. I have 3 young kids, and nothing is more important to me than a clean, sustainable future for those kids. So as I understand it, SCAP is both climate and sustainability, and I'd like to encourage the committee to also think about the sustainability part. And when considering sustainability, I think we should look at all different types of pollution beyond just transportation. In particular, the California Air Resources Board has found that as of this year, gas lawn equipment and similar small engines account for more smog-forming pollution than vehicles. And if we continue on the current trajectory, these small engines would account for twice the pollution of vehicles by 2030. So obviously for this reason, California passed a law to ban the sale of new gas-powered lawn equipment starting in 2024 or later, but current equipment and equipment purchased out of state can continue to be used. So we're not going to see relief from this type of pollution anytime soon unless we act now in our own community. So these pollutants, even if they're not greenhouse gases, matter. They matter for our health, they matter for our children and the elderly, they matter for the future. In recent weeks, we saw air quality plunge across the Bay Area due to a dense fog trapping in exhaust and other pollutants. And exposure to these pollutants contributes to all sorts of diseases, to lung cancer, heart disease, stroke, asthma, preterm birth, premature death. It's not just a nuisance, it's literally killing us. And according to a recent study, air pollution in the Bay Area causes over 5,000 deaths and over 10,000 cases of childhood asthma every year. It matters. So please, in your sustainability efforts, consider the pollution in our community from gas leaf blowers and other lawn equipment. They've already been illegal for 16 years, but they're everywhere. When I bike, when I run, I can smell the gas and fumes. Right now outside my window, there's a gas leaf blower going and I had to close my window. So please consider taking some of the resources and efforts being put toward transportation and solving this much easier problem, which is phasing out gas leaf blowers. There could be community education, there could be trade-in programs for gardeners to switch to cleaner equipment, and we could solve this problem quickly and ensure a cleaner future for our kids. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Helen. Our next speaker is Arthur Lieberman.
Good morning. We're fortunate in Palo Alto to live where many people can cycle, walk, and run. Since retiring, I have returned to cycling and walking, and they are an essential part of my everyday activities for fitness and for conducting my essential activities. I feel fortunate to live where I actually am living in a 15-minute city. And increasing cycling and walking requires both good infrastructure for safety and a welcoming environment. A survey of SRP people who don't bike say that it's because of safety questions. However, there's also, as Helene mentioned just previously, a welcoming environment issue, which for most residents requires more than a safe infrastructure, flat areas, and good weather. As Sylvia has said, Palo Alto is very proactive in improving the cycling infrastructure. It also requires, however, a quiet, relaxing environment and good air quality. No matter what kind of infrastructure is contemplated along El Camino, for example, the noise and the fumes from the cars would make this unappealing and unacceptable. Even in residential streets where I live, in Barron Park, the fumes from small gas-powered engines, specifically the noise, and even worse, the emissions from the gas blowers and mowers, make cycling and walking often unappealing. The California Air Resource Board estimates that these small off-road engines emit more nitrogen oxides, reactive organic gases in California than light-duty passenger cars in summer and annually. At the very same time of this meeting, 9 a.m. on December 9th, the Air Resources Board is holding a hearing on reducing future emissions by establishing new standards in Title 13 of the California Code of Regulations. And as Helene said, what can Palo Alto can do about improving air quality? It's to enforce the ordinance it has on the books that bans the use of gas-powered blowers in residential neighborhoods. And in fact, this ordinance should be increased to include not just residential areas, but all areas in Palo Alto. And they need to be required, commercial landscapers who use these devices don't need education in order to not use gas blowers. They need to be required to use zero emission devices. The ordinance should be enforced and gas blowers banned in residential and non-residential areas. That will increase the use of cycling and walking and the pleasurements of that kind of experience for people in Palo Alto. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Arthur. Next is Andrea Gara. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you. It's so exciting to hear all these great ideas. But I want to echo David Cole's comments that I do think it's important that somehow the SCAP is not held as separate from other city business. I agree. I think that every time a decision is made, there should be someone who's giving a report on how this decision is going to affect our SCAP goals. So that's big picture. Smaller picture, I do a lot of biking. I think that one thing we have to think about in terms of safety, and I don't know the answer to this, is that the increase in delivery trucks has made biking more dangerous because they're frequently parked next to cars and then bikes have to try to make their way around those trucks and it's kind of a blind passing. So I think if we're talking about safety, which I do think is the biggest barrier to more people biking, we have to think about how those delivery trucks are impacting that and think about what we can do. Also, thank you so much to everybody who spoke about the leaf blowers. That's a constant problem. I have asthma, and if somebody's blowing on a street, I literally have to go on to the next street because I just can't go through those kind of clouds of dust and pollen and leaf particles. I'm a landscape designer, and I also think there's a part of this that could be maybe educational, talking to people about how way too much leaf blowing is being done. It's not good for people's plants or soils, and I'm wondering if the city could get out some information to people about leaving more leaves where they fall. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Ken, you're next. Ken Kirshner.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, you can.
I'd like to thank the SCAP leadership and the ad hoc committee. I thought the presentations today were extraordinary. And my main message today is that we need to quintuple down on the plan. The meet the moment opportunity is vast. And to get mode shift that's going to reduce greenhouse gases is going to require 5 times the amount of safe biking infrastructure that we're talking about. So there's a history in Palo Alto of leadership on mode shift, and we've demonstrated it with the middle and high school commuting. That can be replicated for the general public, but only if we rebuild the kind of planning and development muscle with quick build and a new bike plan that's atrophied over the last 5 years. And I'd like to encourage a speed and scale mindset. And I referenced John Doerr's latest book on the plan for how do we save this planet. And Palo Alto has a leadership role to play in that. And we need to be much more aspirational than we currently are in a, I'll call it, get back to status quo, things as business as usual. We need to break that mindset and rebuild a lot more muscle. And that includes political will, where it's going to be unpopular to remove parking along right-of-ways and build the kind of bike infrastructure that the city really deserves. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ken. That's our final speaker.
Okay, well, thanks to all the public speakers. Really appreciate your input. I'd like to give the chance to turn this back to our ad hoc members for further comments and reflections.
I'll go. Thanks to everyone who called in and spoke today. I quintuple down. That's a new one, Ken. Thanks for sharing that as a way to think. The main thing I wanted to share is that, traditionally, whether in our society, certainly in, our community and definitely on council, economics has been the main way that we have made decisions. What can we afford? What is the cost benefit, et cetera, et cetera. And that happens every Monday, and it happens for a good reason, right? It's completely understandable. Last week, a few of us had the opportunity on council to spend some time with members of Danish companies and members of the Danish consulate here. And at one of the breaks, one of the gentlemen told me that the floods of 2011 in Copenhagen and in Denmark were a major turning point. And it shifted them from thinking about what are we going to do? We're going to build a bridge. We're going to, build a building. We're going to, repave a road, whatever, from this is the infrastructure to a climate first approach. Everything that they do, at least according to this person, is thought about from a climate first approach, and then the infrastructure follows. So that's what I'm reflecting on. I appreciate the comments about meeting the moment. In our pre-meeting today, we were talking a little bit about how do we help the whole community feel that making these investments is the right thing to do now. And while I appreciate that the people who called in believe this strongly, and many of us do as well, we have to figure out how to get the whole community to believe that this is the new way we should be making decisions. And so there's political will, but there's also community momentum. And so that's what I'm reflecting on listening to this today. All right, thanks so much.
Great. Okay, so I'll follow up on that, and I concur that we should be looking at really all of our policies and programs and staff reports through a lens of, and what are the SCAP implications of what we're doing. And so that it's a deliberate consciousness. This is one of our 4 council top priorities. It's embedded in our comprehensive plan and in the sustainability and climate action plan. And when we look at a lot of staff reports, we look at consistency with the comp plan. Well, this is an extension of that. And I think that's a really valuable recommendation that folks have put forward. And when we do look at a lot of these programs from that deliberate consciousness, we begin to see, oh, gee, there is a strong connection, sometimes very favorable. So the council, for instance, had this year put forward to bring a economic development manager, initially as a consultant function, but then later as a staff person, with an emphasis on local serving businesses and services, in the added context of how much we are valuing and living locally now in kind of the post-COVID era, or the COVID era. And so those two things really fit well together, that what we were doing for services, because that's a quality of life issue for residents, it is also very much a sustainability and a climate issue as well. I wanted to mention on just the coupling of or decoupling of parking. This was one of the reasons that I have been supportive of the residential permit parking, because without that, we have the ability to simply externalize the parking costs. So a developer can come in, underpark a project, and it's neighbors who bear the burden. But by the RPP program, we can make sure that is internalized within the project. And in fact, driving, having shared micromobility and shared vehicles are all part of how these projects can develop. I will say though that the strongest, there were questions about how much we should decentralize our services in the community. And that is certainly something that is very advantageous. It is on the one hand, it runs up against cost benefits. And so that when we have demand concentrated and services concentrated, they do have cost benefits. But that doesn't mean there aren't significant things that we can do. In our previous comprehensive plan in 1998, there was an intention to rule out mom and pop grocery stores, as they were called then, little bodegas that we had scattered in our community. In the previous comp plan, they had actually sunsetted those as legitimate uses. We used to have more of those in our neighborhoods than we have today. And the comp plan from the 80s said, oh no, we don't want that kind of thing. And we drove them out of the neighborhoods. So my argument back in 98 was, well, we may not have a lot of opportunities for them, but they're now consistent with the values of that plan and our current plan. And we need to look at those opportunities. And some of them may be on public land. So everybody likes having a little corner store, which would be a 21st century version of that. Maybe it's more of a, being able to get milk and bread and latte and who knows what else. But looking at what are today's demands for those kinds of local services. But no, everybody, if you buy a home and you got one down on the corner, everybody says, that's great, I bought into that. But good luck trying to plunk one of those in an existing R1 neighborhood. On the other hand, though, we do have other opportunities of public land. We like at Rinconada Park, we used to have a snack shop and it got eliminated, but that's an opportunity to serve all of that neighborhood and all those public functions there through some sort of local service like Councilmember Cormack was talking about. And then lastly, I want to echo the issue on both the importance of, if within local housing, affordable housing and moderate income housing. And first, that those particularly workers who reside in affordable housing are predominantly service workers who are not able to have their work from home to the degree that tech workers can. And so they've got to be 5 days a week, and having them have housing in the community where they work is really valuable. And that exists with our affordable housing to a good extent today, that we have many of those valuable members of our community who are able to literally bike to work because they have affordable housing there, and it's critical to build upon that. But then that middle income housing, I've been arguing that actually in today's economy in this region, we don't get market rate middle income housing built. We get market rate high income housing built. And so the middle income housing doesn't require as much subsidy as low income, but I believe that today it has to have incentives and subsidies of some degree to be able to actually have that segment of the market built. And one of the few examples that we have going on is the teacher housing at the courthouse that is coming up, and that is subsidized moderate income housing. We couldn't get that without subsidies. So I think we have to recognize that that is now a form of subsidized housing with less subsidies than the low and the very low income, but it needs some form of subsidies. Now, those can come from land contribution, it can come from zoning densities, and it can come from financial subsidies. But the market won't take care of that on its own. And I agree that it's very important that we focus on that and not just talk about how it would happen, but come forward with the plans and the dollars to make it happen. So once again, the comments from the public, both what we're given orally and what's in the chat, are just extremely valuable. And thanks to everybody for your continuing active engagement in this endeavor. Thanks.
Well, thanks again to everyone, the staff for the presentations and the ad hoc and the public, very thoughtful and helpful discussion. I think that will close us out. We do hope to see you next month at the meeting that Christine mentioned, as well as just a reminder that we'll have an update on the SCAP at next Monday's council meeting. So hope to see you there. Thanks.
And happy holidays to everyone.